The Middle Passage was a trip from the coast of West Africa to the New World. It was on these ships that were used to transport the slaves that some of the most gruesome things happened. The slave ships were like a living hell. One of the most common things crews did to slaves, especially when the ship was running low on supplies, would be to throw living slaves overboard. One of the most notable incidents of this was on a ship called the Zong. Crew members aboard this ship bound together 122 living slaves and threw them overboard with a heavy weight tied to the bottom of the link. On top of that, when slaves would rebel or cause problems, the crew would tie the slaves or slave up to a sturdy post and whip him/her. They would force the other slaves to watch the whipping to scare them and show them what would happen if they caused troubles or rebelled. It was also not common for crew members to also beat women and young children just to show and exercise their power. If a slave or slaves caused real problems, ship captains would sometimes order crew members to suspend slaves or slave in the air by their ankles while crew members took turns whipping the slaves or slaves. Sometimes, just to amuse themselves, crew members would gather a few slaves and force them to dance. If the slaves refused or resisted, they would be whipped until they danced. Crew members would do this for extended periods of time. Some slaves could not handle the torturing and would rather die than have to bear through the rest of the journey on the slave ship, so they would commit suicide. This didn't happen on a very large scale, but it was not uncommon. Slaves would jump overboard and eventually drown or be attacked by sharks that would trail slave ships feeding on their dead bodies thrown into the water.
The air in the hold was foul and putrid. Sickness was common and heat was oppressive. The lack of sanitation and suffocation conditions meant there was a constant threat of disease. Epidemic of fever and smallpox were frequent. Some wouldn't survive the illness or some would go through the misery for 2 months or more. The sick wouldn't be fed, which causes them to die of starvation because they are sick and aren't being fed. 1 in 5 Africans on board died.
During the long journey to the New World, the slaves had to have somewhere to live. The slaves were kept in the bottom of the ships for several months. For starters, everyone was crammed in small living quarters and shackled together. The men were kept separate from the women and children. They were kept in different quarters with just a little bit more space, but they still had to deal with the same harsh conditions. Under the ships, there was little to no ventilation. This means that it was constantly hot and stuffy. There also wasn't a proper place to excrete bodily fluids and waste, so everyone had to use the bathroom on the floor. Adding to the fact that everyone was extremely close, disease spread easily. Many slaves would die under the ships, and the next day they would have to be thrown overboard. Most of the slaves were physically weak. This is due to a mix of disease and only getting 2 meals a day.